This is live from my office. Thank you for listening wherever you do, on whatever platform you're listening. Please subscribe, follow, like, review, comment, and certainly email me at thecochranshow@gmail.com. This may be the shortest introduction that I've ever done on Live from my office because I want to get to the meat of the deal here, and that is an interview with my friend Mark Doyle, who spent a year as an embed in Afghanistan, knows more about it than anybody I've met, frankly. And I've interviewed many experts on the topic, and he just has the clearest, most concise take on the mess that we got ourselves into, the mess of getting out of it, and why it never worked. There's got to be some lessons learned this time. You can hope. But just a great explanation from Mark Doyle coming up. And then we segue into a charity that was an outgrowth of his time in Afghanistan. So that's all coming up. But as promised, a short introduction. So let me just say this. Thank you, David Hochberg. David Hochberg and Team Hochberg at 855-56-DAVID or 56david.com. Title sponsor of Live from My Office. By the way, another pal of Mark Doyle. What we'll do is we'll take a break. We'll come back and you will hear Mark and mine discussion on Afghanistan and what's happened and why. He gets it. And there's great stuff in here that you're not hearing anywhere else when we come back on Live from My Office. If you're refinancing your existing home, do what I did when I needed to refi. I called Team Hochberg, a trusted local lender. Don wanted to refinance his 3.75% loan. He heard thousands of Team Hochberg ads. So he called Team Hochberg, right? Naturally. What? I'm being told that's not right. Wrong. Don called his current lender, who quoted a low rate with a closing cost of $3,400. Well, Don thought those costs were high, and he was right, so he called Team Hochberg. Should have done that in the first place. David explained to Don how his current lender was overcharging him. He helped him secure the same low rate and half the closing costs. So let's review. Don's current lender tried drilling him with excessive closing costs. Team Hochberg helped Don do the exact same rate and half the closing costs. Team Hochberg helped me and thousands of listeners, and like Don, doing things like securing low rates and low closing costs and saving stress in your life. Well, David Hochberg's there, and he just wants to save you a little money. 855-56-DAVID or 56david.com. That number again is 855-563-2843 or 56david.com for Homeside Financial, an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. Now I'm live from my office. I am always happy to say these words. Here's my friend Mark Doyle. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Steve, and I am so happy to hear that.
You know, we don't talk enough, and I blame you.
As a middle child, I'm used to it, so no worries.
I suppose so. There are a million things that came out of the fact that you lived in Afghanistan for a year on the ground, and many of them are really good things, not the least of which is Rags of Honor. And we're going to talk about that in detail coming up. But if you don't mind, I want to go back to 2014. You wrote an op-ed that the Chicago Tribune ran, and I still think to this day it's the best public statement on Afghanistan that I've ever seen. It explains it on a level that we couldn't understand. And frankly, it's a slap in the face for America, all of us, to grow up and realize what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do, and what we can't run away from. And it's all very, very germane to the moment. So I know you like when you sit on my lap and I read to you. But if you don't mind...
I miss those days.
If you don't mind, I want to do a little setup here, and then I'm going to read specifically from your op-ed. So let's go backwards for a second. It's late 2012, I believe. Might even have been 2011. You and I are having lunch. And you look at me and you tell me, I got an idea. I'm going to go take this forensic accounting task for the American government. I'm going to go to Afghanistan. I'm going to live there for a year. What do you think? And I tried to talk you out of it for an hour because I was worried about you. And I didn't understand what was on the ground and what you were dealing with. Thank God, like so many other times, you didn't listen to me. So... explain what forensic accounting is and explain how that task came up and how you got there.
Forensic accounting is the autopsy of a balance sheet. That's how it can best be described. When money goes missing, whether it's in corporations or unpaid corporate taxes or during bankruptcies, there is, an exhaustive process often, but only one way to find out what really happened, and that's to do an autopsy of the balance sheet. Money out, money in.
So is this follow the money? The phrase follow the money?
This is follow the money.
Okay.
This is the essence of following the money. And in Afghanistan, for several years leading up to Task Force 2010, which I was embedded with, there were reports of just massive amounts of embezzling of billions along the supply chains. And as the story goes, at one point, there was a congressman from Congressman Tierney from Boston, who wrote the Warlord Report, which just chronicled the amount of just corruption in Afghanistan, starting in, I think he did it in 07, 08, 09, right? And then it bubbled up to Congress, and General Stanley McChrystal was in charge of U.S. operations in Kabul. He got an earful about the fact that under his watch and previous watches, this money was being just extorted off the grid to the tune of billions. And as the story goes, turned to his aide and said, "We have to do something about this." The aide said, "What we need, boss, truly is a forensic accounting unit, embedded with us." And so the call went out, and we had done some work for the federal government. We put a bid together. We win the bid. I would say laughingly, in typical government style, we were the lowest bid. So they took,
right.
But we gave them a fair bid. A lot of people bid, $800, $900, $1,200 an hour because they were going to be in a battle space. We just thought this was our way to do what we can for the war, and we came in so far below. But our task was get embedded with Task Force 2010, which was an anti-corruption and interdiction task force. It was an amalgam of State Department, Treasury, Homeland Security. And we were attached to it. They were off across the street, what's called ISAP. We were on the Kabul base.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, your job, as you understand it, when you're going in and getting there, is to find out where the money that we're sending there is going, if it's being used for the nation building, labeled or unlabeled, that we were doing, or if deals are being made or it's just flat being stolen. Is that oversimplified, or is that it?
That is, no. But that's the craziest thing about this entire mission for 20 years is it was so simple. It ended up being all about nation building, which, as I write about, was ultimately just a mistake because it was never going to work. So yes, that was our job. Where's the money coming in? Who's spending it? Who's stealing it?
Now, you went there with some of the misconceptions that we all have because we're America. We have the American ego. We believe in the good life that we provide opportunistically for people here. And we believe everybody in the world wants it, whether they know it or not. So let's begin with the Mark Doyle op-ed from the Tribune. And I'm going to post this, Mark, with your permission, along with this episode so people can link to it because it's terrific. It really is. So 2014, forensic accounting, nation building, as we said. Mark writes, "I witnessed firsthand the noble but, in my opinion, futile attempt by U.S. agencies as well as U.S. and allied forces to engage in counterinsurgency, a strategy called COIN, while attempting to implement nation building, an effort in a country that's neither ready, willing, nor able to handle Western-style democracy, finance, or even the most rudimentary aspects of a modern country." And you continue, and this is crucial. "In order for this basic tenet to work, there's a presumption that the following exist: a culture that's literate, a culture that has a basic financial infrastructure, a strong central government, and mostly and importantly, a systemic rule of law and the ability to collect revenue." Afghanistan was 0 for 4, right?
Yes.
Let's go in
0 for 4.
Let's go in reverse order. That collect revenue piece. To this day, and we're 7 years down the road, I have never heard anybody but you explain that you cannot have a country that can't support itself, defend itself, if they don't have a basic way to collect taxes.
It is so rudimentary that it is truly shocking that the Treasury Department or the World Bank or the UN hasn't made an effort to understand it, or maybe they know that the reality is none of that's ever going to work, so we just can't even address that. But we talk about it in the piece, but think about, as much as everybody hates to pay taxes, just think about a society where at one point it was about 86%, forget what I say in the piece, of all their revenue is donor revenue.
It was over 90. I don't have the number in front of me, but I think it was north of 95%.
Yeah. So for any listeners, just think about the United States. If we have a $2 trillion economy,
mm-hmm.
what if 1.9 trillion was just loans from other countries?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't generate any profits, no incomes, nobody to pay taxes on services or on goods that then get paid to local governments, which pave the roads and fix the bridges and pay for schooling. And that's what your taxes go to. So imagine a situation where none of that exists because there is no Department of Revenue in Afghanistan. There is no Department of Revenue. And at one point, it was 5 to 7% was the top tax rate, and none of it was ever collected.
So when you have no collection from the public, you can't build the schools and the roads or have the police force or the army or all the things we take for granted here. So you take a basic business plan where, as a small business, maybe you're going to invest $100,000. Good for you. We're talking about $1 trillion over the course of the last 20 years, and we were just throwing it against the wall.
And we look at it now. The one of the definitions of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Right.
And for 20 years, we have done the same thing over and over. And it is one thing to say we have made great strides. We have. That's what $1 trillion, 2,500, almost 2,500 American lives. At one point, 75,000 U.S. soldiers, airmen, and Marines on the ground will do for a country.
Right.
But at some point, and the reality of those who fought with us, and there were brave interpreters and brave Afghans who fought. And I'm loath to say this because I don't want to diminish any of their contribution. They weren't fighting for our country. They were fighting for their own country. Right. That's what they were fighting for.
Right.
And so the notion that after 20 years, they still couldn't stand up an army that would withhold 50. There were 300,000 in the Afghan army and 50,000 Taliban, and they all surrendered.
And I want to get into the specifics of that, too, because that, like everything in Afghanistan, is a layered story where it's not as easy as what it appears to be. And again, you know that better than anybody. But again, the op-ed, which we will link, I thought the way you wrap this up, and I feel like I'm giving away the movie to some extent, but you're right. In order for this basic tenet to work, there's a presumption that the culture's literate, the culture has financial infrastructure, a rule of law, the ability to collect revenue. And without any of that and any ability for that to exist, keeping Afghanistan from becoming radicalized may be the right thing to do, but spending billions and billions, $1 trillion on reconstruction, risking lives of civilians and certainly our people, it's irresponsible and it's indefensible. And you've been saying it for years.
10 years. When we killed Osama bin Laden, Obama should have gotten out. That's just, he just should have gotten out.
Right.
But there is, as you say, a confluence of factors, many well-intentioned military and well-intentioned State Department and well-intentioned AID, the Agency for International Development, it's the international development arm of the State Department, and they go in and they dig wells and they build schools. We built 500 schools when I was there. I was there in 2010 till 2011. And then I lectured a little bit around the country about it, and then finally just said, I've had enough, and that's when I wrote the piece. But so they built 500 schools. By the time Obama left office, over 500 of them were shut down.
By the time Obama left, so we're talking about 2016.
Yes.
And shut down because they were unsustainable, or because of the
Taliban and
the tribal nature of the country was the Taliban would just go in and shut them down, and we didn't have time to go back and open them up again.
And closer to Kabul, you still had woman-owned businesses, and you had some schools, and you made some great strides. But in the end, water seeks its own level. And there was just no prospect for, absent the things that I mentioned in the piece, not the least. It flows from the fact that the culture is so corrupt. What we now know is that after Trump and Pompeo literally released 5,000 of the most ardent criminals that we arrested, Pompeo and Trump make a deal to release them. So they go up in the north of the country and they start going town to town. Come to find out, the Afghan army and the Afghan police hadn't been paid in 9 months.
Right, so they hadn't been paid. They were short on weapons, materials, and food and water, by the way.
Supplies, yes. Supplies, like basic living supplies.
So we're not saying, by the way, that the Afghan army didn't have a responsibility to defend their own country. But based on that, and having that gone on for weeks and months, the notion that many of them said, I'm out of here, it shouldn't be shocking to people.
Not that surprising. If you go back a little bit of history, you read the book 1776 about Washington and his early fight, and at one point it was Ben Franklin who went and finally got a commission to pay. The soldiers were not being paid, and they were planning a mutiny. And George Washington executed one in front of the entire platoon, because he had been planning. We're not getting paid. This is crazy. Let's stage a walkout. He heard about it. He stood him up. He put a pistol to his head, and he shot him. And that got everybody's attention. Now, he did go on to get them paid. But imagine you live in Mazar-e Sharif, which is up in the north. You're just really a simple tribesman. And, we read in the piece, we talk about how the U.S. government made great hay about how they were teaching people to read, which is true and admirable. If you were an officer, you got taught to read up to a third grade level. Anything below, you got turned up to a first grade level.
Understand this, by the way, a third grade level. That was the achievable goal. That's the measure or the level of illiteracy that lives in the country. And that's tragic, but it's true. It's factual, and people need to know that.
Yeah. So that fellow way up north has a third grade education. He lives 300 miles from Kabul. He's on either a forward operating base or a COP, what they call a combat outpost, essentially. Hasn't been paid. Has a family who's starving. No real jobs. He's not going to go be an Amazon driver. This is his job. The U.S. Made a commitment to stay as long as we needed to stand up the army, but you guys need to do it on your own. But then layer in the fact that he hasn't fed his family in 3 months. Now, that rolls back to the strong central government theme. Strong central government would make sure everybody got paid.
Right.
Ghani, not only did he not pay them, he flees the country with God knows how many millions, tens, if not hundreds of millions. So as you point out, it's a confluence of a highly illiterate country, no strong central government, unachievable goals of a regular democracy, and corruption that is the overarching theme that has run through that for the last 1,000 years. not just the last 20.
Well, and that's really key, right? Because even though our goals and our actions were different, the Soviet Union was barbaric in the way they tried to overrun Afghanistan.
Yes.
We shut them down and taught the Afghan people how to take care of themselves, but we left. We didn't build the schools. We didn't take care of the teenage population who grew up to be people who would follow Osama bin Laden, and they went right back.
And not just follow him. He was one of them.
Right. He was one of them, and we supported him during the Soviet Union conflict there and helped shut the Soviet Union down. Good for us. The Berlin Wall falls. Good for us. But then we leave. So I'm not saying we are the Soviet Union, furthest thing from it. But we make a lot of the same mistakes and just saying we're going to implement our rule, our life, our system on them. And boy, won't that be great.
The caveat to that, and then not the pushback, but the difference I've noted when I've given speeches or talked on conference calls is that unlike the Brits and unlike the Russians, we were there at the behest.
Right.
Karzai was installed. They wanted to try and form a democratic government. And so we weren't there to fight against the Afghans. We were there, what seemed understandably ended up being an occupying force. But our root reason for being there was to help establish a democratic form of government, wholly different than what the Soviet Union and Russia was there to do.
Oh, yeah. And again, I don't want people to think I'm comparing.
Sadly, the result is the same.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying that we did what Russia did. Russia was as bad as it gets. But we were right to go. We weren't right to stay.
Right, exactly. Full stop.
So you end your op-ed piece with this. The Marine Corps manual contains a quote from T.E. Lawrence that the U.S. would do well to embrace. Here's the quote. Do not try to do too much with your own hands. Better the Afghans do it tolerably than you do it perfectly. It's their war. You're there to help them, not win it for them. We never got to that point.
No,
and I don't know that we ever could. We would be there 100 years and we wouldn't get there.
There's none. Success has 1,000 fathers, and failure is an orphan. So if you are in the military and your job is a trainer and you are there to train and you take a group of ragtag Afghans and you take them from 0 to 2, your after action report is we made some progress.
Right.
True. But it gets perpetuated. We're making progress. If you're not making the same progress politically, where you are standing up a government that is incorruptible, right, that is competent, that is literate, and that is flowing through a financial and banking system that is open to all, accessible, then you end up right where you end up with. You may have a standing army that can support itself. You may have a police department that will stand up at some level. But in the end, they are so intricate that if you don't have all of those things, you will not have a civil society, and it will not work. And we're living it right now. It just will not work in the way in which we believe a democracy should function. Now, that also puts us in an awkward position if you look about, we don't want to get too political here, but we had people beating police officers on the Capitol steps, former military, former police,
right,
beating their own U.S. citizens,
right,
with flags saying USA, USA.
Right.
So, maybe we can't take the upper hand here in this argument anymore.
No, our moral high ground on how to run a government ended on January 6th. That's not political. That's being an American and telling the truth of that nightmare and the gutless Republican members of Congress who won't even look into it. The shame that should be on them and for the rest of their lives is incalculable. Yeah. And the only thing that's different than the horror of what's gone on in Afghanistan is it's not accompanied by continuous violence. It's outrageous. That's not political. All right, let me back you up for a second. The Taliban is not some organized crime operation. It's a crime operation with 1,000 fathers. And is Tom Hanks, as Charlie Wilson says at the end of Charlie Wilson's War, they don't get the New York Times. So in the furthest reaches of Afghanistan, and not that far out of Kabul, are people that operate as members of the Taliban in name only and do what they want. They're still stoning people, and it is 1,000 years ago. That's what's going to happen there now.
Well, and we haven't even talked about the Haqqani Network. The Haqqani Network is what they call a CPN, a criminal patronage network. It has been operating there for at least 15 years, maybe before, but it was a real issue for coalition forces on the supply routes because they control the supply routes. And if they didn't get paid off, they just blow up convoys. And then they ended up having a bunch of businesses in false names that were really run by the Haqqani Network. So the Haqqani Network is now just reared its ugly head. So you've got the Taliban who say that they want to stand up a regular form of government because they've changed. But ISIS is in the country, who has traditionally been their archenemy, and the Haqqani Network is not even so much in the shadows now, but talk about a criminal patronage network that will try, to the extent that there is any normalized business flow, they're going to take it all. They're going to be skimming off the top, right? And there's no FBI to take them down.
Right. And we're not going to be there to take care of it. And I want to get into the political side of this in regards to the withdrawal and how poorly it appears to have gone. Obviously, we have terrorism. We've had Americans killed at the airport, countless numbers.
We have 3 Marines dead so far. KIA today, by the way. Just got a report.
As of August 26th, when we're recording this, and we know there's probably more to come. So I want to get into the politics of this. But before we do that, the heartbreak for me continues to go back to those images of women and girls who were 1,000 years in the past until we were there, and we helped change their world. So you've got girls who were born after we arrived, who would now be 18 years old and looking forward to moving on with their lives, who now may become, victims, prisoners, forced wives at the age of 10, 11, 12. All of those things are real, right?
Yes, they're real. The caveat is that, again, that if we believe them, hard to believe them, believe me, it's hard to believe that the Taliban means it, when they say we are not going back to the old ways. We want the women businesses to be open, and allegedly the women-owned businesses in Kabul are open for business, and that the schools are open for women. What could be happening in some of the outer provinces, which we're hearing about, are some revenge killings. And again, every day in Chicago, there's 14 gang members who shoot somebody. And so that is, you have to separate out the gang violence and the lawlessness from the general theme that if we believe them, they want to be taken seriously as a governing body. And so the time will tell if they want to preserve the strides that the U.S. has made in educating women and building schools, those that are still left. So that is the real question. But
without any sort of central command, again, we come back to a different form of not having a centralized government.
Yeah.
But the Taliban is a name, and there may be a small group who hope to profit and rule, but it doesn't mean they control those thugs, those gang members, everywhere in the country. So how can we trust? Why would we trust them? I guess there's no trust and verify when there's never been trust. But why would it be any different? I mean, I don't want to say it's impossible. Anything's possible, but it's hard not to be negative.
No, you have to look at this through the lens of a very negative lens, to be sure. The theory behind the case that the Trump administration had was, we are not going to include the sitting Afghan government that we are part of, that we've helped to stand up in our final negotiations. We're just going to negotiate with the Taliban.
Completely cut them out, by the way.
Yeah, so it sends a signal to the Taliban, we're obviously in charge, because the U.S. just had to deal with us and us only. And by the way, we got everything we asked for. We didn't have to do a ceasefire. We didn't have to talk about any withdrawal. We got complete control and almost got a meeting at Camp David. So we did pretty well. So start with that as your baseline. They made the case that they want to be a governing body. There are 38 million Afghans. There are 200,000 Taliban. They've got an $18 billion annual salary, government salary. Where is that money going to come from if the sanctions start to come? If they don't do what we're talking about, is let the businesses stay open. Try and form a representative government. Try and stimulate an economy. It will just come down to dollars and cents. You guys want to live with the 200,000 of you on as much money as you can steal for now, because eventually that money's all going to run out. And you're going to be 200,000 of you in charge of a country of 38 million, all of whom will probably want to kill you.
Right.
So the realities of trying to govern, to your point earlier about going from essentially a ragtag bunch of essentially Pakistanis, which is where the Taliban came from in 84. They were rejects from Pakistan who came into Kandahar and formed the Taliban. And so the vast majority of them weren't even from Afghanistan. So they're going to have to make a decision, and they said they have. We want to be taken seriously as a government now. All right. So within the first 90 days, if the banks aren't open and nobody will go to work because they're afraid, and women won't come out because they fear for retributions, and your economy shuts down, and all of our allies stop sending payments, which the U.S. I think it already did, start putting sanctions on,
right?
Or just cripple them, bring them to their knees. Then, and maybe then, we missed our opportunity in 2002. We had them on the run. We could have negotiated. They were beaten, and we chose to let them off the mat. We may just have to let them just starve themselves to death and go back in and say, now we're ready to negotiate. Here are the new terms, and do it without firing a shot.
There is, of course, the obvious concern that the terrorism that led to 9/11 will have a home base and a camp and a reset, the rebirth, regrowth of Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, ISIS whatever, gets to grow in country because they have a natural enmity, if that's the right word, with the Taliban, but they'll have their own base. Point being, who's going to benefit from this? And why would any country want to get involved with this after the Soviet Union was ended and we spent all this money and now we're leaving? Is it China? Who's going to back them?
China would be, whether they're a backer, I think we spoke off air. The one thing China, while I was there, China proposed, I think, a $4 or $6 billion investment if they could come in and start to mine all the minerals. There are just a dearth of the highest grade minerals in the world. But ultimately, the Chinese pulled out at the time, going back to 2011, 2012. They've ultimately pulled out because the terrain makes it impossible to lay down train track, and they were being attacked on a daily basis and losing too many Chinese workers, and they said, we've had enough. So the Chinese are likely to maybe try and be a partner there, but the Chinese are going to want to profit out of it. So if you have an economy that is in tatters and a government that is now just so corrupt and so inept and so illiterate that it can't function, even for China to come in and say, we're going to stake a claim here, seems like a stretch. So, and with regard to the first question, we have more capabilities now than we did in 2001. We have drone capabilities. We won't have any what they call human intelligence. But as the president has said, and all presidents do it, we have enhanced capabilities now. We do counterterrorism and interdiction around the world in places where we don't have boots on the ground. We have Delta teams, SEAL teams. We have eyes in the sky. We pick up chatter. We drop drones down people's chimneys a lot around the world that you never hear about. so it is conceivable that we could still find a way to monitor, pick up chatter, and to the extent maybe outside of Kabul, down in Helmand, up in the north, up in Badakhshan, or where you're far enough away from general civilization, they still talk on cell phones, and they still can triangulate. And so you could still have operations that were counterterrorism operations without a footprint there.
So what about former President Ghani, who I would argue was the domino that tipped that led to this nightmare of the last 10 days, 2 weeks? The Saudis, I'm guessing, if he's in Saudi Arabia, aren't going to help us,
He's
right?
in UAE. No, he's in Dubai.
All right, so he's in Dubai. Are we going to get any help from them to get him out with all the corruption and money hidden there?
The answer is who knows, but what I'm hopeful right now, the president can't deal with that right now.
Right.
But
Understandably, by the way.
He's fuming. This guy's got to be fuming because Ghani begged him not to leave, and then the first guy out the door was Ghani.
Right.
And he left Biden holding the bag. Now, somewhere there's $50 million with Ghani in the UAE. We have an ambassador, and so far they're an ally of ours. I am hopeful that between the CIA, the State Department, the FBI, and the counterterrorism, and maybe a Delta or SEAL team, we're trying to locate this guy. And the president, at some point, when he gives his final address, he's going to say, I hope I'm going to find Ghani, and I'm going to deal with him, but Ghani's going to pay for this.
Right, which is the absolute right thing to do.
Yes.
Obviously, it's a very downbeat discussion to go through all of this, but it's personal to you because you did live there. You made friends there. Do you have any level of optimism about the people who are left behind?
Well, in the last 10 days, I was on the phone with my business partner, Tom Creel, yesterday, and we have been working. There's 10 people. Masood, Masood was a fighter. Masood is a guy who tipped off the Americans, tried to get to the Americans to tip him up on 9/11, and he was murdered 3 days before 9/11. And because he was a U.S. ally, in-country freedom fighter of the highest order, but they killed him. They named a circle after him in Kabul, Masood Circle. His son is still there, and Tom has been working with his son to try and get visa applications expedited. And I will say, I'm going to call my friend Tony Blinken and say, you should know that your embassy in the last 3 days has gotten 10 of these things processed in 3 or 4 hours. And now that you said, now, of course, we know what's going on at the airport. But most of the people we know got out, but Tom still has a few people there that we're trying to get out.
And once we meet this deadline of, what is it, next Tuesday?
I think those deadline's off now.
I would
hope. You're the president, and they just killed 3 Marines.
Right. Yeah.
That deadline is now come and gone.
All right, so let's shift to politics for a second because that's a perfect transition to it. Ezra Klein wrote in the New York Times today, let's not pretend that the way we withdrew from Afghanistan was the problem.
Right.
Point being, yeah, this is a mess, but the mess, as we've said here, and as Mark Doyle has done such a great job of explaining, is as old as thousands of years, or certainly as old as the last 20. And Ezra Klein cites an old line. The quote is, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So the idea that we've got a better idea, and boy, are you Afghans going to like it. What do we do now? And Biden politically, he probably didn't handle it in what we would expect the Biden way in the beginning, but he seems to be trying to do what Biden does. Do the right thing, fix it, and own it. And I got to tell you, you tell me if I'm wrong about this, I don't remember Bush, Obama, or certainly Trump ever saying, this is on me.
They're the only two, Secretary of State Tony Blinken and Joe Biden are the only two senior, either president or senior cabinet officials ever to say, I take full responsibility. Tony said, I take full responsibility for what happened. Bush never said it. Don Rumsfeld never said it. At one point, Don Rumsfeld was asked if he ever had any second thoughts or thought about some of the men and women who were killed. He said, nope. Literally said, nope, I sleep fine every night. Well, bully for him. So the one thing about Joe Biden that I know, everybody who knows him knows, is he does take this stuff seriously. His son went to war in Iraq, most probably died from military toxic exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And so he does take it personally, and they are taking full responsibility. And all we can do now is extricate ourselves from there to the extent we can. It was always going to be ugly. It's true. He keeps saying it, and nobody wants to hear it because they want their president to tell them, like Trump used to say, I made a beautiful deal. I made a beautiful deal. Everything was beautiful. It was the greatest ever. And Bush, said, mission accomplished. And Barack Obama just refused to say the truth is we killed Osama bin Laden,
right.
And we're getting out now.
Right.
And so if anything else, you give these guys credit for saying, I'm going to take that. I'm going to wear the jacket for this, regardless of what it looks like. But all we can hope for now is that the Taliban do what they say they're going to do, that they try and stand up a government. They try and have a democratic form of government. They try and keep peace. They root out ISIS because they don't want ISIS blowing up their shops now. Because now they're accountable for their citizens.
There's a lot of academic resources that you can peruse if you choose to about the history of the tribal nature of Afghanistan. It's as tribal as a country as any that exist in the world. And we don't have time or let me use a word I hate, the bandwidth to go into it here. But I think a really important part of this discussion is there are going to be people left behind. And there's going to be some Americans that don't get out either. I don't want to be in the Oval Office figuring out how that's going to get fixed because you can't fix that with a drone.
You can't. Now, again, you're in politics, as in life, when you're explaining, you're losing. However, in June, the State Department and the White House started pleading with Americans and NGOs to get out. And the 1,000 who they are trying to keep in contact with are those who said, no, we're good, we're staying. So some of the people who are there, sadly, the Taliban will not kill them. We don't believe the Taliban because they don't want to get in a shooting war with the U.S. And if they do that, they're going to force the president's hand. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who should have left, and they said, we're not leaving. And maybe they did it for all the right reasons. They wanted to stay and finish the mission. But it puts the administration in an awful position. He said, you need to leave. We're not leaving. And then the wheels come off and said, please get us out. Well, we asked you to get out, but now you need us to get you out. And now the situation on the ground has changed, so you put me in the worst possible position. I asked you to leave. You wouldn't. You want to leave. I can't get you out.
The worst thing you can do in this country, and this goes for your relatives, your family members, and your loved ones, is to get involved in the politics of this. The right-wing nut jobs who want to scream about a Biden failure and lie about it, or frankly, the far left as well, who has made things much more difficult than it should be for Democrats, who ought to be able to figure out a way to manage this. And again, I've never been more independent in my life. Mark, you've known me through the years.
Yes.
As people probably all considered me a moderate Republican, which I probably was at some point. The far left and the far right are the problem. They're not the solution. And what we need to do is to get behind the effort of doing the right thing, which is what this country was built on. And I'll take that idealistic line to the bank every single day. And if we don't get back to it, shame on us.
And yes, and it comes with consequences sometimes.
Absolutely.
So the right thing to do for America right now is to make sure, and it's too late for that because 3 Marines just died. But this underscores what Biden said. We got to get out. We can't hold the line there anymore. I was left with 2,500 troops. So either I put 10,000 more on the ground, which I said I'd never do, or we just work with what we got that Trump left us and see if we can get everybody out. But the best we can hope for is we're going to make a decision and we're going to rip the Band-Aid off and we're going to get everybody out. And the right thing to do is make sure no more Americans shed a single drop of blood in that country because we can't want it more than they want it.
100%. And for everyone who has suffered and sacrificed, and that's a lot of people listening to us right now on this podcast, not just here, but all over the world, who have lost somebody they loved or saw somebody suffer because they served there, in some cases with lifetime injuries. None of that was in vain.
No.
You served America. You did it for the right reasons. And let me just wrap this segment with you with that. Your experience on the ground, on the base, from the moment you got there and your ride wasn't there. By the way, how scary was that night? To the time you spent there, the men and women you got to know. What do you want to say to them?
Best and the brightest. You did your job. You did it with honor. Don't look back. Don't make a judgment about whether or not the overall effort detoured from what you did. I told you the story about, the drive team was a woman Marine who was one of our drive team members. And we drove in these up-armored vehicles just to get around town. We got to a checkpoint, Afghan there. They were just starting to try and hand over some of the Afghan checkpoints to the Afghans. And so we always carried a big sheet of paper, the drivers did, in Pashto that said, we're Americans, we're going to the embassy, and usually it was for safe passage. And she rolls the window down and shows it to him. And he shakes his head. And she shows it to him again. She's a woman, of course, and he decides that he is going to try and show her and teach her a lesson, and he decides to step back. She jumps out of that car so fast, puts her M4 barrel right to his forehead. And this guy, he moonwalked, he cleared the path for us.
Suddenly her papers were all there?
Yeah, suddenly all was good. And I said, well, we're going to go. We're in the car. It's going to go. But the point being, that woman did her job.
Right.
Every day with honor. And everybody who was there did their job with honor. Again, I come back to this war. They need to be able to fend for themselves. They need to be able to defend their own women. Those women have fathers and uncles and brothers who need to defend them. You did your job. Be proud.
When we come back, I want to talk to Mark about the charity worth mentioning on this episode, which is another very personal thing that frankly came out of his time there. It's called Rags of Honor. We've talked about it many times back in the radio days and certainly here. Can you hang with me to do that?
Sure, I'd love to.
We'll take a break and come back on Live from my office. I got to tell you, I think that was pretty good.
I think so. It was.
The interviewer wasn't so good, but the guest kicked ass.
You just know you're so good at just pointing it in the right direction to get the response that, yes, it's good radio, but it all has the virtue of being very emotional and very true.
Well, you know what, buddy? Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and Ginger and good dancing in your part.
Thank you.
Stand by. I want to get you sent me a plug list a while back, which has all the associated websites and things, and that makes it easier for both of us because we're old.
I am really old.
And about halfway through this, you're going to forget who you're talking to.
Oh, I won't do that, Jim.
Stand by, still looking here. A friend of mine said something years ago which made me laugh, and apologies if it's blasphemous, but when he was frustrated about something, he'd yell out Christ on a bicycle.
I love that. Kippy says that all the time.
I never heard it.
Once.
I don't know where it came from, man, but
he heard you say it once. We say it all the time now.
It just makes me laugh. All right, so I've got Rags of Honor, obviously. Is Masks of Honor still a thing?
It is, but it's so toxic. Stay away from it.
All right.
Right. Veteran Roasters.
Rags of Honor and Veteran Roasters. That's the two, right?
Yeah, we get the R&R Brews sort of back in business. We're at the airport. We have a tap handle. Our lager is at Stanley's at the airport, and we're sort of bringing it back online.
What is the beer side called?
R&R Brews. R&R, like rest and rejuvenation. It's a sort of a military term.
Okay. Well,
so we created
okay, cool.
with our friends. Yeah.
Back on Live from my office with my friend Mark Doyle. So one of the outgrowths of your time in Afghanistan was getting to know the men and women who serve and gaining a newfound eyewitness view of them, a close-up view of them. And you came back with a knowledge that we now know far too well, and that's the scourge of PTSD that leads to homeless veterans, which led you to Rags of Honor. What is Rags of Honor?
We are an apparel company, a silkscreen and apparel company, just devoted to hiring homeless and at-risk veterans. We do custom work, but we have our own brand of clothing, T-shirts, and their fall collection will be out soon with ball caps and hoodies and knit caps at ragsofhonor.us. And all of the proceeds go to Alan and Yasmin and Joshua and Jimmy and Pedro and the team that just kicks out all the gear.
And the idea is you want to give people who are either homeless or headed on that track as veterans. As you and I have said many times, it's homeless vets. It's a phrase that shouldn't even exist. And you want to give them an opportunity to be able to earn their way to stand up for their lives and restart their lives. And you've done it so many times. Or, well, I shouldn't say you've done it.
Times.
Yeah, I shouldn't say you've done it because you never accept that as a compliment. And you're right. They've done it, but you've given them an opportunity for them to do it.
And they all, you know what Tamika who you've met, who worked for me, said it best when she said, you know, we're veterans. We just need a hand up and we'll get the rest of the way ourselves.
Right.
And it was so true. And we just provide a work environment for them. We pay up to $20 an hour. And when they come to work for us, if they don't have an apartment, we make sure they get a bank account first. If they're still living in a shelter, we work long enough to get them a little money in the bank, get them a veteran bash voucher for a place to live. We have the nonprofit Rags of Honor 1. All the donations in there go back out the door to helping veterans who are either need housing or public transportation assistance. And so we smooth that runway for them to just live the life that you and I have grown, to be accustomed to.
And the shirts and the hats and the products are really high quality. I say that because, if I were running a business like yours, I'd try to cheap it. But it's great stuff.
Not true, by the way.
It's
all made in America.
High quality gear.
All made in America.
And great stuff. Now, your lovely and extremely talented wife, who you've always been way over your skis with, Kip, helped you take this business in a couple other directions as well to service the veterans community. Explain to people what Veterans Roasters is.
She did. So we had the idea to start a coffee company. As a quick sidebar, the term Cup of Joe started in the Navy over about 100 years ago. And so we decided to just build a different vertical. And I was tied up with all my money. Frankly, everything that I had from my savings was in Rags of Honor. So she took her savings and started Veteran Roasters with the same mission to hire at-risk and homeless veterans. And we partnered up with a great local coffee roaster, and we bring our folks in. They learn how to roast, and then we were lucky that Brandon Marty, who was a Navy pilot for 11 years, came into my universe, and we let him, take the lead. So Brandon Marty is the owner, along with my wife Kip, and pre-COVID, we had 9 full-time employees over there at the roasting facility. We're building them back now, but you can buy it online. And veteranroasters.com, you can get a Coffee of the Month Club. It's some of the best coffee, I would say for sure, that I've ever had. That's why I partnered with that roaster, because he was so good, and he's been so good to our veterans.
Right. Yeah, and Brandon Marty, I'll second that. He's a great guy and a hero.
Unbelievable. He was an attack helicopter pilot for 9 years, and he came out and he ran the Warrior Games here in Chicago a couple of years ago. As you remember, you had him on your show.
Yep.
And that's where we met, and I was so taken with him that I said, you can take the company and run with it, and he has.
Veteranroasters.org?
.com.
Sorry, sir.
Yeah.
And lastly, and this is a newer effort, but it also goes to those who might be thirsty, RNR Brews. RNR is rest and relaxation?
It is. It's a military term, and so we sort of morphed it into a beer company, and Nate Reeves, who's an Army veteran, came into our sphere, and he had worked for another veteran beer company So, like all the decisions I make in my life, none of them are rooted in any fact or common sense. And so when I met him, I said, well, let's start a beer company. And he said, well, I can do that. I said, all right, I can't. So we partnered with Haymarket Brewing, and we took one of Nate's recipes, a lager, and last year we had a hoppy red ale, pre-COVID, of course. And, our logo is actually R&R Brews in Morse code. And, cool. Yep, and our folks out at the airport, the HMS host, was nice enough, especially the Blackhawks as well, to give us a tap handle at Stanley's. So if you're in, I think, Terminal 1 and you're catching a flight, you can go get a nice, fresh lager, R&R Brews lager on tap out there. And it should be, after the first of the year, coming to more bars in Chicago and on shelves at Binny's.
Ragsofhonor.com. Is it veteran or veterans roasters?
So it's ragsofhonor.us.
Sorry.
Really throw up. Veteranroasters.com, rnrbrews.com.
Veteranroasters.com and RNR
Brews.com.
And if you're not drinking at the airport, an expansion to Binny's. Yeah, start, but an expansion to Binny's and possibly other places.
Yes, sir.
Great stuff by you, Mark Doyle. I thank you very much. And again, for those people who aren't aware, go to the show notes, link to this podcast, wherever you get your podcast, and you'll see a link to the op-ed we started the top of this with. And I really want you to read it, and I want you to share it with your friends. You want to share something socially that's important and effective and actually true, share that. And thank you for writing it.
You're welcome. Thank you for always being such a good friend. And truly, you care more about what happens to our veterans and our people who can't take care of themselves than anybody I've ever seen in this space. So thank you.
If you're looking to refinance your existing home, call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. Doris, 78, loaded with debt, barely making it financially off her Social Security and her deceased husband's pension. But Doris was overwhelmed because her late husband handled the finances. She needed help, so she called Team Hochberg for a free consultation. Team Hochberg helped Doris pay off her debt with a cash-out refinance, which helped her afford renovations to make her home safer to live in. Also helped build an emergency fund and reduced her payments over $800 a month. Well, that's almost $10,000 a year. So let's review. Before calling, Doris was stressed out, struggling to pay her bills. After calling Team Hochberg, she's debt-free, made modifications to safely live in her home, built an emergency fund, and saved almost $10,000 a year. That's good news. And that comes from Team Hochberg, where they've helped thousands of listeners to this podcast throughout the old radio days for me. And like Doris, they help rearrange finances, even after the death of somebody you love. But they can't help if you don't call. 855-56-DAVID or go to 56david.com. And tune in to Home Sweet Home Chicago. It's hosted by David Hochberg, Saturday mornings, right after House March at 10 on WGN. Homeside Financial is an equal housing lender, and MLS number 1124061. Well, very simply, thank you to Mark Doyle for the work he and his family continue to do on behalf of vets. And just spread the word. Please share this podcast with anybody who needs this type of explanation or you think might find it interesting. And honestly, get all your friends and neighbors to download the podcast as well. Do it for somebody who gets scared of downloading things. You know the types. Be nice to them. In the meantime, thank you for listening, and thank you to Ross Cochran. None of this happens without him. He produces it and gets it on so you can hear it. And again, I thank you for listening wherever you are in the greater Chicago area, in the United States, and around the world. If you were listening last time, you know that includes our listeners in Papua New Guinea. See you next time on Live from My Office.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Support the show by subscribing wherever you're listening and by telling your friends about it. Follow Steve on all social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And make sure you check out this episode's show notes for relevant information discussed during the conversations. You can also email the show directly at thecochronshow@gmail.com with any questions or comments. And that's the best place to tell us about your favorite nonprofit so we can make sure we mention them on the next episode. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event. And occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochronshow.com for more.